sharing about our demonstration and proof of concept. Yes, we had a constraint at lunch. Everything was out, the tins were out, we thought the soup was in. So thank you all so much for following Scott's directions. And just to let you know about timing, we are starting at 20 till. We will end then at 20 till, and the next 2 breaks will have approximately 10 minutes so that we can get back on track, and we will have a full hour for our next speaker. Before I do introduce our next speaker, I wanted to convey a message from Scott. He said thank you to all of you who have stopped by the booths and talk to our sponsors and our exhibitors. And from Northrop, I'm very grateful for those of you who've come by. The sponsors and exhibitors do help make this conference a reality. So please stop by, say hello, get some games in, and get some freebies. And we look forward to seeing you at the booths. So our next speaker is Justin Roff-Marsh. Now, while Justin may look young, he is quite experienced. He has been preaching the same message he told me for 15 years, the same message very consistently. And 12 years ago, he founded the company that he has in Australia, and just this past month is immigrating to the United States. So welcome to the United States. He's looking to become a citizen, and he is living in Los Angeles, so welcome him to the United States. Now, Justin uses a sales process engineering approach, and he applies that with using a division of labor. He says that it's very effective, and he synchronizes sales and sales with operations, and that provides the leverage required to deal with the challenges, especially in these difficult economic times. Please help me welcome Justin Roff-Marsh.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. The economy is tough, isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah, so the economy is tough. So this afternoon's presentation is about how to increase sales in a tough or even in a shrinking economy. Now, that's a big claim, isn't it? Some of your businesses are down by 20, perhaps even 30%. My claim today is that it's possible for you to increase sales, not just maintain them, but increase sales, in spite of the fact that the economy is shrinking, and it may shrink more. So, obviously that claim can't apply to every single situation. So what I want to do, for starters, so I don't get myself in too much deep water here, is to identify to which organizations this claim applies. For which organizations is it possible to apply the method that I'm about to outline for you to increase sales in spite of the shrinking economy? So the first thing that I want to warn you is that this afternoon's presentation is directed at manufacturers. Can I see a show of hands from the manufacturers? Or you can bang on tables if you like. Okay, so that's most of you are manufacturers. Now, that's not to say it won't be relevant for those organizations that aren't manufacturers, but I make no apology for directing this presentation at manufacturers, and those of you who aren't can simply, every time I say production, you can substitute that for fulfillment or delivery or whatever makes sense for you. So in order to validate that this claim is in fact possible for your organization, here are 2 questions. So these, if you like, are the 2 necessary conditions that must be met. It's off. Okay. So these are the 2 necessary conditions that must be met in order for my claim that it's possible to grow sales in a shrinking economy to be sustainable. Here's the first question. Do you have unutilized production capacity? Do you want to bang your table or raise your hand if that's the case? Do you have unutilized production capacity? Okay, I hear a lot of table banging. The second question is your market share less than 20%? Okay, so who answered yes to both of those questions? Yes, you have unutilized production capacity, and yes, your market share is less than 20%. Can I see a show of hands? Okay, there's quite a few. So it's those of you here to whom I'm talking this afternoon, because those of you, I'm quite confident, can apply this strategy to increase sales in spite of the shrinking economy. Now, if you answered yes to both of those questions, we can straight away draw 2 conclusions without any further investigation. The first conclusion is that you have growth potential. The second conclusion is that your organization's constraint is currently within the sales function. what I want to do first is expand on those two conclusions. You have growth potential. So I've drawn a little graph here. On the vertical axis, we've got sales. The horizontal axis, we've got time, so sales over time. And the bottom section there represents your plant utilization, which, as you've already admitted, is less than your plant capacity. So we have utilization bumping along there at less than 100%. Okay? The important question, though, is where is your utilization and where is your plant capacity relative to the market demand? Now, if in answer to the second question, do you have less than 20% market share, you said yes, then the reality is that there's room for you to grow significantly before your size starts to impact fundamentally on the nature of the market in which you compete. In other words, you can grow quite a bit before your size starts to impact on the rules of the game that you're playing. Make sense? Okay, now here's an interesting thing. We all know that market demand will vary from time to time because of natural variation and perhaps because of a catastrophe on occasion. But I wouldn't mind betting that the market demand in aggregate will never vary to such a degree that it will start to impinge upon your plant capacity. Is that a fair call? No matter how tough times are, you will never get to the point where your plant capacity is a significant percentage of the aggregate market demand. Hence my claim, you have growth potential. By the way, a note on questions. I may not have time for formal question time, but that doesn't mean I don't have time to answer questions, and I'm prepared to answer questions. The only thing I'll ask you to do, if you have a question, don't put up your hand, just rise, move to the microphone. I'll see you there, stop, take your question, and handle it as best I can for a little person. Okay, so there's my first claim, you have growth potential. The second point that I want to explore, and here's a second conclusion that we can draw from your answers to those two questions, is that sales is your constraint. Now, I've been a part of the TOC community for a long time, and I've observed a lot of TOC companies and a lot of TOC practitioners talking about the constraint being the market. I'm skeptical about the validity of that term. I think when we complain about the constraint being in the market, what that is a case of us production people looking around the plant and saying, well, gosh, it ain't in here. So it must be out there. But, hang on, the goal of your organization is not to make widgets, is it? It's to make, remind me, the goal of your organization is to make money. Yeah, the goal of your organization is to make money. I would suggest that if your constraint isn't in production, it may well be somewhere else in your organization. If it's not in production, it's probably going to be in sales, and if it's not in sales, it's probably going to be in new product development. And if it isn't, you're all out of luck because your existence is at the whim of the market as a whole. So in most cases, we need to get a little bit real and recognize that if our constraint is not in production, in other words, if we are underutilizing our plant capacity, then our constraint is most likely in sales. Tell me something, for a manufacturer, is it optimal for your constraint to be in sales? Is it optimal for your constraint to be in sales? If your constraint is in sales, what does that tell you straight away about plant utilization? It's got to be less than 100%. If you've invested millions or tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in plant, does it make sense for your plant to be underutilized? Most likely not. So we need to broaden our definition of the system to include the system as a whole, to include sales and to include new product development. And on those occasions where our plant is operating at less than 100% utilization, it is prudent for us to conclude that the constraint is most likely in sales. Now, sales is probably not the place where you as manufacturers would like your constraint to be. You'd probably rather production's a constraint, because if production's a constraint, that means the plant is running as fast as it possibly can. Now, it doesn't mean that every piece of equipment in the plant is running as fast as it possibly can, for reasons that the speakers before me have adequately demonstrated. But it means that if we view the plant as a black box, you're squeezing as much throughput from that black box as we possibly can, and that makes sense if that's where all your investment is. So in an ideal situation for a manufacturer, I would suggest production's a constraint, which means upstream from production, we have a queue of forward-booked orders, or queue of orders. And the job of sales is to do what to that queue of orders? The job of sales is to maintain that queue of orders at all times, an order buffer, if you like, so as to ensure that at no point will production be starved of work to perform. And as per the previous point, I'm claiming it's possible, at least theoretically, for you to do this even in a shrinking economy by virtue of your relatively low market share. Those of you who are from Boeing can talk to me later. Okay. So if sales is currently your constraint, and it doesn't make sense for sales to be currently your constraint, we need to think about, well, what are we going to do to fix that? And really, you've got two fundamental options. One option is to scale the existing sales function. In other words, take note of how sales looks and how sales operates currently in your firm and simply scale it. And for most of you, that will mean employing more salespeople. The reason scaling your sales function will mean employing more salespeople is because your sales function, for the most part, consists of just salespeople. That is sales. We'll come back to that point in a minute. The second option is to look for opportunities to improve the productivity of your sales function. So it's elevate versus exploit, to use terminology that Mark introduced earlier and Jim today. Do we employ more salespeople, or do we look to improve the productivity of the sales function? Who's excited about the idea of scaling sales by simply employing more salespeople? Who is starting to suspect that it won't work? We can employ more salespeople, but we don't think sales will go up. Now, hang on a minute. Sales is a constraint for most of you right now. But you're in a position where you believe that if you employ more salespeople, bearing in mind that salespeople are, in most of your cases, the sales function, you will not make more sales. Isn't that a scary thought? Imagine if production worked like that. Imagine you're a printing firm, you had 4 big Heidelbergs out the back. And you had more orders than you could print on those 4 big Heidelbergs. But you were concerned that if you went and bought one more Heidelberg, you wouldn't print anymore. Would you be starting to suspect that something is fundamentally wrong with your production environment? So, something is fundamentally wrong with our sales environment. Most of our sales environments will not scale. We cannot increase sales by adding more salespeople. That is because there's a number of reasons why, but one of the reasons why is that in most of our cases, salespeople spend a very limited amount of their time engaged in an activity that I call business development. Most of their time is engaged in an activity that you guys probably call account management, looking after existing clients. What that means is if you add new salespeople, you don't automatically acquire a commensurate number of new accounts, do you? If you spread your existing accounts across your new team of salespeople, all you've done is increase costs, no new accounts. So what I'd like to do for the balance of this afternoon session is to explore the second option, how to improve the productivity of your sales function. And we're going to have fun with this because the reality is that most of you have boundless opportunities to improve the productivity of your sales function. We're also going to have fun with this because most of you are engineers or production people. And my message for you here today is that by virtue of your being engineers or production people, you already have the requisite knowledge and the requisite skills required in order to improve significantly the productivity of your sales function. In fact, what you need to be doing is getting the sales managers and the marketing people the hell out of the way so that you can use your common sense and experience and engineering capabilities to fix that function of the organization that is sorely in need of fixing. Let's talk about that for a minute. If we wanted to find a time in history where production looked like sales looks today, how far back would we have to wind the clock? If we got in a time machine, traveled back through time, how far would we have to go to find a point in time where the production function looks like the sales function looks today? It'd be like 150 to 200 years. And if we traveled back in time and looked at industry, we would discover that far, 150 to 200 years, we'd discover that industry was performed in a craft shop environment by a special breed of individual called an artisan. The reality is a modern salesperson is an artisan operating in a craft shop environment. A typical salesperson is your sales process, is your sales function. That single individual is responsible for the entire end-to-end workflow. That single individual is responsible for identifying potential customers, doing the necessary research, building the lists, writing and dispatching the direct mail campaigns, making the telephone follow-up calls, performing the visits, designing the solutions, writing the proposals, doing the negotiations, fine-tuning the contracts, assisting with delivery, solving customer service issues, and then after the initial deal is won, managing that account, whatever the hell that means, until the end of time. In fact, it's worse than the picture I initially painted. A typical salesperson is operating as an artisan, not just in the sales function. The salesperson's responsibility is a lot broader than that. In most organizations, the salesperson, in addition to owning the sales piece of the organization, actually owns the entire customer interface. The entire interface between you and your customers. And look at how that person operates. Now, I don't want to cast aspersions on salespeople. Salespeople, in my experience, do the best they can with the poor hand they've been dealt. We need to remind ourselves who dealt them that hand. When we as engineers acquiesce to the marketing people, because, gosh, after all, we're just engineers, we don't understand marketing, that's a black art, we were neglecting a responsibility of ours, and it's time that we took back control. So, obviously, things have changed a little bit in the last 150 to 200 years in production. Fair call? As a consequence of these changes, we've seen many orders of magnitude improvement in throughput or in volume. What's happened to quality in that same period? Well, in that same period, as Larry mentioned a little while ago, we've seen commensurate increases or similar increases in quality. So in the last 150 to 200 years, both volume and quality have increased in lockstep by many orders of magnitude. And of course, the motive force behind this incredible change, this unprecedented change in the evolution of our species, is this fascinating concept that we're all too mature and experienced to talk about that much anymore, called division of labor. Division of labor is the simple concept that sits behind the incredible improvements in our rate of production, in our quality of production, and in the consequential improvement of our wealth and standards of living we've seen over the last 150 years. Now, interestingly, sales is the one part of your organization that has been until now untouched by division of labor. We have division of labor on the shop floor. We have division of labor in engineering. We have division of labor, think about it, even in finance. The one area of our organization where we don't have many engineers, we even have division of labor there. You go into a typical finance department, reasonable sized firm, guess what? You've got accounts payable people who do accounts payable, accounts receivable people who do guess what? And then you've got a whole team of management accounting people who won't touch the financial accounts because it's their responsibility to do forecasting, reporting, budgeting, etc. We see more division of labor today in finance than we do in sales. So here is the key to unlocking the enormous opportunity for productivity improvement that I'm suggesting is lying dormant within your sales function. If you can reach out and figure out how to unlock that dormant capability, the dormant capability is surely significant enough to enable you to increase your sales to the degree necessary to buttress yourself against this shrinking economy. So I'm not going to sell the merits of division of labor because all of us owe our existence to division of labor. In fact, division of labor, as you would have learned in primary school biology, precedes even the emergence of human beings on the planet here. But what I want to talk about are the three critical prerequisites for division of labor. All of you would have learned these at some point, but it's tempting because they're so obvious to forget about them. The problem is when we go work in sales, we have to remind ourselves of the basics. Because when we go and work in sales, we're talking about transitioning an organization from a craft shop environment to a modern industrial environment, and we don't get that opportunity much anymore because there aren't that many craft shop environments left, save for sales. So let's talk about the three critical prerequisites. If you wish to apply division of labor, there are three things that you must first do. Number one is you must standardize workflows. So the standardization of workflows means that the same product follows the same routing on every instance. So each time you manufacture product A, if we're talking in a production environment, product A, every time you manufacture it, follows exactly the same routing through the plant. The workflow is identical. If you do not have a standardized workflow, you cannot apply division of labor because of the fact that in the absence of a formal routing, it obviously isn't possible for the individual resources to know what they should be doing and when. It's as obvious a prerequisite as Larry's work breakdown structure is to a project management environment. The second prerequisite is the interesting one. And this is the one that we forget about in sales environments. Now, standardization we tend not to forget about. We're aware of the need for standardization, so we go and we buy a CRM, customer relationship management software. We stick the CRM in, and as part of the CRM implementation, we standardize the workflow, and we mandate that everybody will follow that workflow. It's a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition for the transition that we're making. In fact, if all you do is standardize a workflow, what you will tend to do is penalize your best performers, because you will force them to follow a standard routing for each opportunity of a similar type, where that may impose an unnecessary overhead on their performance. In the case of a CRM, certainly you're going to impose an overhead on the performance of your people because you add to them the requirement to do a whole bunch of clerical tasks, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So centralized scheduling is the next prerequisite, and we all, who are the TOC people in the room? Two of you? Bang on the table. Who are the TOC people? Okay, and the rest of you are from Lean or Six Sigma. It doesn't matter. I think we all recognize intuitively, if not formally, the requirement for centralized scheduling. What happens if we put 6 people in a rowboat? Their job is to win a race. We instruct them because we're their coach to row as quickly as possible. What happens if each oarsman rows as fast as he possibly can? The boat goes in circles, it may even capsize. So we're all aware that in an environment where we apply division of labor, the synchronization of the rates of work of the resources is more critical to the output of the system than the individual rates of work. Now, of course, we understand this in a production environment. So I've never been into a plant where there isn't a master scheduler. Of course, we recognize it's important in a sales environment, in a project environment. I've never been into a project environment where there wasn't a project manager. But we need to tap ourselves on the shoulder and remind ourselves that sales is no different. If we want to apply division of labor in any environment, including sales, the minute we break the workflow up into discrete units and hand units of work to individuals, we must centralize the responsibility for scheduling, because otherwise we will end up with synchronization problems. The oarsmen will row at different rates, the boat will go in circles and possibly capsize. Now, interestingly, when we talk to salespeople about this kind of process improvement, they intuitively understand this danger. If we say to salespeople, look, instead of writing proposals yourself, we would like you to have estimating write all the proposals. They're very quick to identify what will occur. They recognize immediately that proposals will not be done on time, and they will not be done on time. The reason they will not be done on time is not because there's anything wrong with division of labor. The reason they won't be done on time is because in any environment where we apply division of labor, we must centralize the responsibility for scheduling, or workflow management, if you like, must be centralized. The third requirement is we must have a formal management regime. When we apply division of labor in an environment, irrespective of the environment becomes more fragile. The reason it becomes more fragile is that each resource is aware only of his own work center or her own work center. Resources lose that 360-degree awareness of what's going on around them. That's particularly the case if you've got people working in a large plant. Some people are upstairs in the mezzanine, some people are on the shop floor, and it's obviously going to be the case if we have some people in the plant, some people up on the mezzanine, and some people out there in the field. It's impossible for us to expect our resources or our workers to synchronize their rates of work intuitively. It may happen in a rowboat. It's certainly not going to happen in a modern plant, in a modern project environment, or in a modern sales process. So if synchronization doesn't occur automatically, there's a very real danger for synchronization problems to start to derail the performance of our project. And management's primary responsibility in a modern organization is to look after the synchronization machine, to look after centralized scheduling, and to look out for anomalous behaviors on the part of individuals that may derail the performance of the system as a whole. It's no longer good enough to say, well, we employed intelligent, well-meaning people, they will figure out for themselves. They won't because they can't. So what I want to do now is talk a little more about division of labor and about all of those three prerequisites. But I want to stop talking so much about production and start talking now about sales. So in other words, what I want to explore is what would happen if we took this theory with which you as production people are all familiar. What would happen if we took this theory and applied it in a sales environment? In other words, what would happen if we started with a clean sheet of paper and engineered your sales function from scratch? If we approached it not as engineers trying to be marketing people, but as engineers trying to be engineers, and designed the sales function from a clean sheet of paper, how would it look? Let's start by doing a time and motion study on salespeople and see if we are happy with what we see. If you were to do a time and motion study on your salespeople, you'll quickly discover an interesting thing, and that is that your salespeople spend less than 10% of their available capacity selling. If we define selling as sitting face-to-face with potential customers negotiating transactions, which to my mind seems like a sensible definition of selling, then your salespeople spend less than 10% of their capacity doing that. Why is that the case? Well, we all know the answer why. The reason salespeople spend less than 10% of their available capacity selling is because they're so busy performing the other activities that are required of them. So the other activities include prospecting. It includes customer service. It includes fulfillment tasks, helping out with delivery, wandering into the plant to expedite Bob's order through production. It includes the clerical activities associated with opportunity management, literature fulfillment, proposal generation, et cetera, et cetera. It includes solution design in technical sales environments, which would be most of your environments, I suspect. That it includes a fair few social activities that somehow get snuck in there. Now, less than 10% of their capacity doesn't sound like, let's make it a little more concrete. A typical salesperson does 2 business development appointments a week. across a whole range of industries. Doesn't matter the industry, doesn't much matter the country. As long as it's a developed nation, the typical salesperson does 2 business development appointments a week. I classify a business development appointment as a pre-scheduled meeting with an explicit sales objective. In other words, we're not counting random drop-ins, and we're not counting meetings with no explicit objective, probably the kind of meetings where the salesperson drops by to see if everything's okay. In the back of his mind is perhaps a thought that I might stumble across a piece of business if I'm lucky. What I'm talking about is formal business development meetings, pre-scheduled meetings with an explicit business development agenda, objective. Salespeople do 2 of them a week. Now, we've discovered through experience that it's feasible for a salesperson to do 20 business development appointments a week if they are planned centrally. Sorry, if they're planned sensibly. So it is possible, if you can remove from salespeople the requirement for them to do any activity other than business development meetings, they will have the ability to do not 2 a week, but 20 a week. Now, here's a caveat. When we talk about business development meetings, we talk in terms of meeting slots. And I talk for simplicity about a standard meeting slot. Let's say an hour to an hour and a half meeting. That means if a salesperson's operating in a technical sales environment and he goes on site and runs a half-day workshop, we will class a half-day workshop as 2 meetings. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that in a technical sales environment, your salespeople should be seeing 20 discrete appointments in a salesperson's calendar, but I'm suggesting that a salesperson should be performing the equivalent of 20 standard meeting slots. A typical salesperson does 2. So we're talking about an opportunity to increase the effective utilization of salespeople, the effective utilization by an order of magnitude. Is that huge or is it just colossal? An order of magnitude. Now, of course, there's 3 types of activities that we need to remove from the salesperson to enable this to occur. And the reality is it's not that hard to figure out where we should put these activities. There's a set of activities that relate to promotions. Where should we put promotions? Well, you guys have marketing departments. What are they responsible for? I don't know either. But a good thing for them to assume responsibility for is the generation of sales opportunities, and that's what we call promotion. So the responsibility of your marketing department should be to generate the sales opportunities that are required to maintain your salespeople at 100% utilization. Now, we are going to deliberately engineer this hypothetical sales process here to operate at 100% utilization because we are recognizing that sales is currently the constraint. At some point in the future, when the constraint shifts back to production, we will need to throttle back sales, but we'll worry about that later. That's the subject for some other 60-minute slot. So promotions we give to marketing. Administration and clerical. Do salespeople do much admin and clerical? You betcha. There's data entry into the CRM. Don't they love that? Writing call reports, sitting in hotels on Friday nights. Writing routine proposals, estimates, etc., budgets. Literature fulfillment. Calendar management. And the scheduling of meetings. All of those are activities that can and should be allocated elsewhere. 2 that are particularly worthy, or 1 that's particularly worthy of note is the scheduling of meetings. We do not, under any circumstances, want salespeople to be scheduling their own meetings for a bunch of reasons. One of the reasons is that scheduling their own meetings draws salespeople from the field into the office. Is it possible for them to be in your office and performing business development appointments concurrently? No, it's not. When the salesperson comes back to your office for an hour, how long is he in the office for? The rest of the day. An office to a salesperson is like a flame to a moth. If you wanted to destroy the productivity of any individual in your organization, the easiest way for you to achieve that rapidly is to have that person oscillate between the field and the office. The reason for that is you need quite a different environment, an operational environment and a management environment for a field-based person relative to an office-based person. We do not want salespeople in the office, we want them in the field where they can sell. That's the number one reason we don't want salespeople scheduling their own appointments. The second reason is that scheduling their own appointments are all of the logistical activities that goes with scheduling appointments, making hundreds of telephone calls to contact the right individual, sending email reminders, rescheduling when someone had to shift something, booking flights, rental cars, accommodation, and so on, consumes about 50% of an individual's time if that individual is operating at 100% capacity. So in other words, it takes about as much time to schedule field-based business development appointments as it does to actually perform field-based business development appointments. So the second reason we don't want salespeople doing them is if salespeople do them, straight away it cuts their capacity in half. The third reason we don't want salespeople booking their own meetings is because they're lousy at it. The booking of business development meetings is a specialized skill. The person who books the meeting needs to get on the phone and sell the meeting, not get on the phone and sell your products and services, which is what salespeople invariably will do. Now, if it were possible to sell your products and services on the telephone, you shouldn't even have field-based salespeople. You should get rid of them and replace them with a wholly telephone-based sales team, inside sales, as you call it in the US. That will be significantly more efficient than a field-based team ever could hope to be. So there's a whole bunch of clerical and administrative activities that we can and should move from salespeople to head office-based personnel. We'll talk about who and how in a minute. And then we've got these customer service and fulfillment activities. And they fall into two classes, semi-technical and technical. Customer service is what I mean by semi-technical. Customer service means taking an inbound call from a customer who's asking a question or reordering. It also means making an outbound call to procure a sale that you have a reasonable likelihood of procuring. In other words, a repeat purchase. Both of them are semi-technical operational tasks. Neither of them are sales tasks. The other types of activities that fit into this segment here are the technical activities, solution design, in other words. Salespeople devote a lot of their attention in technical sales environments to designing customers for their solutions for their customers or potential customers. Now, this causes an enormous problem down the line. If you operate in a technical sales environment and your salesperson goes out in the field, meets with the customer, takes the brief, conceptualizes and perhaps even draws up a solution, goes back and presents it to the customer, gets the customer's approval, and then hands it off into production, do you think production can produce it without the salesperson's further involvement? Absolutely not. So if you allow salespeople to take your customers' briefs, and if you allow salespeople to design your customer solutions in a technical sales environment, salespeople will necessarily get embedded in fulfillment, meaning they will not be able to go out in the field and sell. Production people will need access to them, and salespeople will need access to them. The key to eliminating that is very simple. We have technical people, senior engineers with lots of experience, partner up with salespeople. Salespeople go out in the market, identify opportunities, and at the appropriate point in the workflow, introduce in the technical expert who takes the brief and designs a solution. For the rest of the workflow, the sales workflow, then the salesperson and the technical person work together. They have parallel responsibilities. It's the responsibility of the technical person to specify a solution that can be delivered, and it's the responsibility of the salesperson to ensure that the solution specified by the technical person can be sold, and that ultimately to ensure that it is sold. So that was a quick discussion on division of labor. This is all I want to show you where the standardization of workflows is concerned, because you all know how to build a workflow. And I want to echo Mark's comment about simplicity. When we teach our consultants how to draw or modify workflows, we tell them they're only allowed to use two shapes, a circle and a rectangle. If you feel the need to map a workflow with more shapes than a circle and or a rectangle, in other words, input-output or an activity, then you are getting too granular. And we take that to ridiculous extremes. If any of our senior people see a workflow with any symbol in it other than a circle or a rectangle, we make the consultant redraw it and then present it back to the client for approval and explain to the client how they made a mistake by involving this other spurious symbol. So a simple workflow. If it's not simple, it ain't going to be followed. Now here's the fun bit, and this is where it all starts to pull together. The subject of this little session here is centralized scheduling. So you're going to see how centralized scheduling works in the context of a sales environment. You all know how it works in production or projects. But this is also where you get to see the sales process as a whole take form. So we have a salesperson out there in the field. We want that salesperson to be fully utilized, performing 4 business development appointments a day, 5 days a week, or the equivalent thereof. If all the salesperson is doing is business development appointments, then obviously the salesperson is not performing any of those other activities he or she was performing previously. And before we go to the next step, we must recognize that because we've applied division of labor, we are likely to have, if we go any further, a synchronization problem. Therefore, we must centralize workflow management or scheduling. So we add a sales coordinator, a person we call the sales coordinator, behind the salesperson. The sales coordinator takes ownership of the salesperson's calendar, because that is the schedule, is it not? Okay? Now, this is not for the faint-hearted. The reason I'm happy to be doing this presentation in tough economic times is because you guys have to pay attention whether you like it or not. If times weren't so tough, when I told you we were going to transfer the ownership of the salesperson's calendar to the sales coordinator, half of you would have got up and left already. So I'm happy to have an attentive audience. So I'm serious. We transfer the ownership of the salesperson's calendar to the sales coordinator. Now, let's talk about the relationship between the salesperson and the sales coordinator. Who's an executive? Can I see a show of hands? Who has a personal assistant or an executive assistant? Who works with someone who does? You all know what the relationship looks like. So it's a special kind of relationship. The relationship that develops between an executive, a senior executive, and an executive assistant. If you think about it, it's a special kind of relationship because the executive assistant is junior to the executive on the organizational chart, but in a sense, the executive subordinates to his assistant or her assistant on a day-to-day basis. Is that right? Who owns the executive's calendar? The EA. Does the executive put stuff in his own calendar? No, because he doesn't own the bloody thing. His executive assistant has sole access to his calendar, sole ownership of his calendar. The executive assistant becomes a gatekeeper to the executive and is responsible for managing all inputs and outputs. Now, why do executives have executive assistants? What value does an EA add? If you think about it, there's an interesting parallel here. An executive assistant is a person who is presumably valuable and who has innumerable demands on his or her time. We are deliberately causing a salesperson in this new model to operate in exactly that same environment, a skilled person with innumerable demands on his or her time. The sales coordinator operates just like an executive assistant, and we insist that salespeople develop a relationship with their sales coordinators that parallels the relationship that their bosses have with their executive assistants. If they can't do it, if it's too much for them, then bad luck. Okay? The reality is that salespeople, true salespeople, love it. Now, they might not like the idea of giving up a little bit of control. But there's a trade-off here. They may dislike giving up control, but let me tell you something. There is something that they have to tolerate currently that they dislike. That's too weak a word. That they hate more than they dislike the idea of giving up control, and that is your damn CRM. They despise the fact that on a Friday evening you make them go back to a hotel room and write call reports and enter fictitious data into this monster of a thing, masquerading as business intelligence. They despise it. And they hate all of the other customer service tasks and clerical activities that go along with selling. So what we're saying to salespeople is, here's a trade-off. Give up ownership of your calendar, give up your autonomy, and we will take away from you responsibility for everything other than selling in practice. If they're a salesperson, they love it. If they don't, they're not a salesperson. So that's step number one. So we now have a situation where the sales coordinator is planning the salesperson's calendar. Every meeting gets booked by the sales coordinator. Not just initial meetings, every follow-up meeting. What that means is the sales coordinator owns the sales workflow just like a project manager owns the work breakdown structure. So as well as allocating activities to the salesperson to perform, i.e. field-based business development appointments, the sales coordinator is allocating to the technical and semi-technical resources, customer service reps and sales engineers, technical experts, the necessary technical tasks that need to be performed. So the salesperson is comfortable that when he attends or she attends a meeting, reports the outcomes back to the sales coordinator on his cell phone immediately after the meeting, his sales coordinator is automatically going to schedule the other activities that are required to appear next, to be performed next, irrespective of whether they need to be performed by the salesperson, a technical engineer, or some combination of the two. Now, the third piece of the puzzle is promotions. The job of promotions, as we discussed previously, is to generate the sales opportunities required to keep a salesperson operating at 100% utilization. That's the reason why promotions exists. Somebody said I was going to discuss mafia offers. I wasn't going to discuss it, but I'll mention the word at least. Maybe that can pass for a discussion. We need to be careful where promotions is concerned. If you guys want to be comfortable that you can generate the necessary volume of sales opportunities to keep your salespeople fully utilized, you need to have a compelling offer. It is not the responsibility of promotions or marketing people to come up with a compelling offer. They are not engineers. They do not know how to build stuff. It is your responsibility to come up with a compelling offer. It's the job of your promotions people simply to articulate it without too many dumb errors and to turn the handle of the promotional machine that exists to communicate that offer to the marketplace. That is the sole responsibility of promotion. Okay? Now, here's the fun part. So we get to see here the sales process in its final form, but we also get to see how we're going to manage it. And it's now that you're probably going to see the congruence with TOC principles, for those of you who are TOC people. The sales coordinator's job is to keep the salesperson fully utilized. That means the constraint within the sales function is, guess what? The salesperson. Now, in the TOC world, we know that in order for a resource to be a constraint, there must be a buffer upstream from it. So the sales coordinator's key responsibility is to maintain a queue of forward-booked appointments. We talk about the forward-booked days buffer. It's the sales coordinator's responsibility to maintain that at its optimal size at all times. And that is management's primary performance indicator. The first thing that managers look at every single day or every single week at a minimum in the environments we build for organizations is what's the status of the forward-booked days buffer in aggregate and for each salesperson. Upstream from the sales coordinator, of course, it's necessary that we maintain a queue of sales opportunities. Now this is a little like a job shop, in that the opportunities in this queue include opportunities that are in play, in process if you like, as well as opportunities that we haven't done any work on yet. Doesn't matter. We talk about the opportunity queue in terms of pending appointment days. And it's the job of promotions to maintain an appropriate number of pending appointment days in the opportunity queue. Now, if we can keep both of those queues of work at their optimal size, then barring catastrophes, the salesperson will be fully utilized, which means he or she will perform 20 business development appointments a week, week in, week out, or their equivalent. You can see there's a little algorithm sitting underneath the opportunity queue. The purpose of that is to sort the queue so the sales coordinator doesn't even have to give consideration to which opportunity should be scheduled next. It's done automatically for her or him so that he or she can simply grab the opportunity from the top of the queue and program it into the salesperson's next available appointment slot. So now that we've engineered the sales function, guess what? We can start to manage the sales function like real grown-up engineers would manage the production function. So when we run a sales meeting, we sit down and we look first at buffer status. So we can say forward book days in zone 2, pending appointment days zone 2, check, check, all's good. We then have these little run charts for individual resources that show the output of each resource over time, along with the metadata that's required should you need it, to analyze the performance of the process and to diagnose any issues that might occur from week to week. So the point that I want to make here is that we're transitioning from managing by intuition, which is of course not management at all, to managing by numbers, which should be a tautological statement. So before I finish, what I want to do is talk to you here about the typical implications in the real world of what we call sales process engineering. And I want to address that which is almost certainly your number one concern, and that is what impact will this have on operating expenses? So what I want to do is do a little thought experiment and imagine here that we were all sales process engineers and we were working with a firm, let's say an engineer-to-order manufacturer that has a team of 10 salespeople. And let's think about what the implications are for that organization of the discussion that we've just had. Now this organization has 10 salespeople. Currently they're performing how many appointments a week? 2 each, gives us a total of 20 true business development appointments a week. That's what we can realistically expect to see. Okay? Now, is it realistic to turn all of those existing salespeople into what I might call, to create a distinction here, business development managers? This is a new breed of salespeople we're looking to establish. Could we take all 10 of this firm's salespeople and turn them into business development managers? We could not. The reality is, if this firm has 10 salespeople, there are at most 2 who have the capability and the preparedness to sell the way we use the word sell. There are only going to be a couple of people on this team who would be prepared to be road warriors, live in hotels and airports, doing 20 business development appointments a week, week in, week out, business development appointment after business development appointment after business development appointment with no distractions. Just so happens I'm one of those people. That's the environment that I live in. When I travel around the world, I meet other people who have the same kind of jet-setting lifestyle. But I have to admit that we are a rare breed. Most of you people won't want to do that, and that's okay, because guess what? If all 10 of your salespeople put up their hands and said, we want to be business development managers, your operations would not be able to cope with you instantaneously increasing your volume of business development appointments from 10 a week to 100 a week. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take the 2 individuals on your sales team who are predisposed to business development, and we're going to turn them into business development managers. We're going to employ for each of those business development managers 1 sales coordinator. So headcount just went up. The good news is sales coordinators cost about half what salespeople cost. Okay, so if you're paying your salespeople 100, you'll pay sales coordinators, say, 50. Now, what are we doing with the other 8 salespeople? What we do with them is very interesting and has very important implications for operations. In other words, for quality. What you're probably going to discover is that the 8 salespeople you've got, or of the 8 salespeople you've got remaining, most of them are experienced veterans with lots of technical expertise, lots of experience, lots of knowledge. They are very valuable to your firm. So what we typically do is convert the greater proportion of those individuals into what we call project leaders. Those project leaders are the technical people who support business development managers in the field. So when the business development manager identifies a sales opportunity, a project leader goes out, takes the brief, designs a solution, is there until the deal is won, and then remains available to production to answer whatever questions production might have, or for that matter, whatever questions the client might have about that which he's purchased. Now, if we take, let's say, 6 out of the remaining 8 salespeople and convert them into project leaders, we have just added significantly to our operations capacity. But we've done a special thing because these technical people are really operations people, but they're on permanent loan to sales. In other words, their job is to manage the interface between sales and production. And that's very important because if you take salespeople out of production, you need to replace them with someone else who's going to perform that function that salespeople previously were performing, albeit poorly. Okay. Now, even though we have just 2 salespeople left, or 2 business development managers left, we're going to increase their volume of activity. If they're operating at 100% utilization, they are each doing 20 appointments a week, which gives us, in aggregate, 40 business development appointments a week, which means we've just doubled your volume of business development appointments. Okay? Before you had 20, now you had 40. That will place other stresses on your organization. So almost certainly we're going to have to add some customer service representatives. Now the nice thing where customer service is concerned is that we no longer have customers ringing salespeople asking customer service questions. Salespeople are out of that. If a salesperson is face-to-face with a client and the client asks her a customer service question, what a smart salesperson will do is pull out her BlackBerry, ring customer support in your office, put the cell phone in speakerphone mode on the table, and demonstrate to the customer what he should be doing in order to resolve customer service issues. The business development manager will, under no circumstances, get her hands dirty with customer service, and there's good reason for that, because the business development manager is ill-equipped to be good at customer service. So they refuse to take responsibility for it. We're going to have to add some customer service people. Let's assume we add 4 of them, cost us $40,000 each. The bad news is we're going to lose a couple of salespeople. Not because we want to, but because we just will. I'm sure you can all see that. It is not possible for us to make a change of this magnitude to a team of 10 salespeople without losing a couple. C'est la vie. Okay. So when it's all done and dusted, we have doubled the volume of business development appointments. We have decreased payroll cost. And I would reasonably expect sales to increase significantly. I've said 130% here. We have cases where we've doubled the volume of sales because of a number of other factors. Okay, so I have like a minute and a half, technically, before my time is officially up. So if you want to ask a question, please jump up and band to the nearest microphone. But before that occurs, what I want to do is do a little bit of an ad for some free stuff that I'm happy to give you guys. As per the slide presentation there, you can go to our website and request a copy of a white paper. If, however, rather than going to our website and requesting that white paper, you'd like to come and collar me over the next 2 days, I'll be here for the duration. Give me your business card, then I will ensure that my sales coordinator back in Australia sends you what we call a starter pack, free of charge, that contains a copy of my book. It contains a 90-minute presentation. The presentation is different from this one, by the way, so you probably still need to buy this one if you like it. And it contains the offer of an in-house workshop for your team and a bunch of other stuff. It comes in a nice little box. So give me a business card and I'll send you a copy, or I'll have my assistant send you a copy of what we call the Sales Process Engineering Starter Pack. Well, you've been a cool audience. Thank you very much. I hope to see you all again.